to another Lore You Should Know segment where we talk about little bits of Dungeons and... Oh, my son of a gun. I was all on.
You were
that one.
on. Everything, all the beats were landing.
Exactly. I was like, all the little phrases that go together in different ways. Welcome to another Lore You Should Know segment where we talk about little bits of Dungeons & Dragons lore for fun, and maybe you get to use it in your games. I am Greg Tito, and I'm joined by Chris Perkins.
Hello.
How are you, sir?
Not too bad.
We are not speaking between the sheets. We are speaking about the rule of three.
Sometimes called the rule of threes.
Threes?
Yes.
It's plural. It's not just one.
It was first introduced as the rule of threes. In later editions, it was sometimes truncated to rule of three. Not to be confused with the character rule of three.
Right.
Which we'll get to.
Many people did. When this was a topic that you mentioned on Twitter as one that we should talk about for this segment, and I saw a whole bunch of people talking about it. So
absolutely,
you get the brain dump here from Mr. Perkins.
Exactly. So, what is the rule of threes, you may ask?
I'm asking it right now.
It is a guiding principle of the D&D multiverse. Now, I say that with the knowledge that it didn't really exist prior to 2nd edition. It was with the introduction of the Planescape campaign setting, with all of its philosophical discussion.
I see.
That campaign sort of brought philosophy front and center and made it a showcase feature of the setting. You chose factions based on philosophies, and then you embrace that philosophy with your character.
Right.
In Planescape campaign setting, rule of threes was mentioned as this thing that is pervasive throughout the D&D multiverse, and creatures on the higher planes or the outer planes tend to be more sensitive to it than people from the material plane.
Okay.
Although even in Earth culture, 3 is a very powerful number, as we know.
Yeah. And when you were mentioning that, I was thinking of like the 3 pillars of Dungeons & Dragons play.
They're the 3 pillars of Dungeons & Dragons,
which is totally a different thing.
Right,
but
yes.
you're talking about the foundational ideas behind the multiverse. This idea of separate shards of reality.
So similar to Earth-based numerology, 3 has great power in the D&D world, in the D&D multiverse. For instance, there are 3 evil alignments. There are 3 good alignments. Mm-hmm. There are 9 alignments total, which you can put on a grid of 3 by 3. There's the 9 hells, which has, of course, 3 times 3 layers. Hags get their power in covens of 3. Mm-hmm. There are 3 kinds of lower fiends: Yugoloths, demons, and devils. You see these sort of patterns of 3 coming up again and again. There's the material plane, then there's the inner planes, then there's the outer planes.
Yeah.
There's the material plane, and then it's 2 shadows, the Feywild and the Shadowfell.
Oh,
These sort of mirror planes.
There's even the idea of a dungeon master who would present 3 different options.
Exactly.
Sometimes it's about binary,
Yes.
but in many ways, I think
precisely, yes. And so, what Planescape argued and sort of compelled DMs to think about is how things can happen in 3s throughout the campaign, and structure your planar campaigns and your campaigns in general always around 3 possibilities or 3 pillars or 3 ways out of a situation.
Yeah.
If you, on the outer planes, particularly in somewhere like Sigil, which is kind of the donut-shaped heart of the multiverse, if you want donuts.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Yeah. 3 donuts.
Even better.
But if you're in Sigil and you want to buy something, it's always better, luck-wise, to pay in 3 different kinds of currency. So people often will pay something with gold, silver, and copper all at once, because it's considered to be good fortune. If you're going to toast to the gods, toast to 3 of them, because you're just smarter and wiser for having done so.
Yeah.
So these kinds of superstitions and belief systems started to permeate D&D pretty much from Planescape on. And in addition, since, we've constantly reminded people that that's a thing in the multiverse that they can tap into, that DMs can. And, I'll do it when it makes sense in a story to hearken back to that kind of thing. And sometimes it's extremely subtle, like just giving 3 different options for how to do something, or 3 different tests, or a character who asks for 3 different things. Give me a riddle, give me an insult, and give me a secret.
Yeah. And even, the idea of collecting a certain number of items in order to complete a quest, it's almost always in threes or
in
multiples
Waterdeep
of
Dragon
threes.
Heist, to get into the vault with all the gold, you need 3 keys.
Yeah. Easy peasy.
And I'd be lying if I said the rule of threes was not on my mind when I was trying to figure out how many keys is the right key.
Oh.
If you don't know, it's 3.
Yeah, just defaults.
Exactly.
Or a multiple of 3.
Right. Yes. Interesting tangent, but anybody who's a fan of the Dark Matter campaign setting might recall that it had its own number, a special number that kept cropping up, and that was 23. But that's a whole different conversation for a whole different game.
We'll get to that on the special Lore You Should Know segment later.
Exactly. Yes. So so as you look at D&D books and stories going forward, just pay attention. You may start seeing the number 3 everywhere. It's like that Next Generation episode.
And there's something fascinating too about the cosmology or the gods all seem to have groups of 3 as well.
Yes, absolutely. And in the faiths that have been built up over the years, you can actually see this idea reinforced. For instance, we all know the god Lathander, the Morning Lord, the god of dawn and rebirth. There is a religious doctrine or tenet in Lathander's faith, which is called the Heresy of the Three-Faced Sun. And that is the idea that there will come a time when Lathander is not demoted, but forced to take on 2 other aspects. So he becomes the god of the morning, then there's the god of the midday, and then there's the god of the dusk. And all 3 of these aspects will be woven together in one new sun god. Actually, a new sun god with an old name, Aminator. And so this heresy is part of Lathander, is sort of embedded in the lore of the game. And other cults and religions in D&D have these kinds of 3-fold prophecies or 3-fold elements.
Yeah, and then that harkens back to real world religions of the Holy Trinity.
Exactly.
And,
yes.
Judaism, Christianity, and Islam as being a 3-faced, form of
precisely. So the D&D multiverse is kind of echoing that in a way with its own take on the 3, the awesomeness of 3-ness.
Yeah, the 3-ness.
So I mentioned at the top of this thing that there's this character called Rule of 3.
Yes.
And he is a colorful chap who was first mentioned in the early Planescape material, got full-fleshed treatment in a book called Uncaged, Faces of Sigil, which happens to be probably my favorite, if not second favorite, Planescape product that ever came out. It's just a collection of cool NPCs that haunt the streets and establishments of the city of Sigil. And this guy, Rule of 3, he is a Cambion, so he's a half-fiend. His father was a Glabritsu demon, and his mother was a human, who hangs out at a tavern called the Styx Oarsman, and basically just meddles in people's business, and is always asking them questions, trying to get information. He's sort of an information broker, but he might have insidious intentions to kind of unravel the multiverse. And he always deals in 3s. He always gives 3 pieces of advice. He demands 3 kinds of payment. Everything is 3, 3, 3, 3, 3 with him. And often his 3-fold advice can be contradictory and confounding, as many things in Planescape are.
And was that I spoke to Dave Cook, otherwise known as Zeb Cook, when we were at GaryCon, which was fascinating, and he had a lot to do with the formation of that Planescape setting.
Did. He was the lead designer on that.
Was that product or that name of that character? Do you think was put in there as an homage to this idea?
Oh, I'm sure, but you'd have to ask him to be absolutely sure. But I'd have to say so. Now, I think by the time Rule of 3, I think, has resonated on some level because he's one of the few Planescape characters who seems to surface again and again and again in different products. So he popped up again in 3rd edition. He popped up again in the 4th edition books, both the 4th edition Manual of the Planes and another 4th edition book that escapes me right now. He showed up in there as a character, and we haven't done anything with him, particularly with 5th edition yet.
But it seems like a character that would meet Strix in one of her jaunts to Sigil and confound her.
I have thought many times that if the Waffle Crew, my player group, ever gets back to Sigil, that I'll have to find a way to get them to the Styx Oarsman just so they can rattle around with this guy.
That makes a lot of sense. So how do you use this kind of rule of three in your dungeon mastering? How's it a way to make sure that it isn't just a bit of lore, but something that people can use practically?
So one piece of advice that I give, and I actually hold myself to when it comes time to building my campaign and running it, is always have 3 stories happening in the campaign. And you can set that up right from the beginning and say, okay, in my campaign, one of the stories is going to be a war story. Like the kingdom where the characters are from is fighting somebody else. That's one of the stories. So you may cross paths with that story at various times over the levels. Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to introduce 2 other stories. And one of them might be a more character-focused one. And then there's a third one. And the idea is that you know how campaigns work. Sometimes DMs have fatigue, and they start to the campaign. They don't know where to take the campaign, or the players sometimes don't know where to go. They're sort of missing the clues that are supposed to be getting them online. But if you have 3 tentpole stories, you can kind of ping pong off of those 3 to shake things up. So if they get bored with the war story, you can suddenly have this other story intrude, and when they get tired of that one, you can shift to the third one. But if you always have 3, you'll alleviate much of the boredom and misdirection that can happen in a campaign. So I do that constantly with all the stories.
And then some of the stories will resolve, and then
if a story resolves, then you can introduce a new one. Exactly. But if you always have 3 going on, and in some cases, like the third story might not get as much attention as the first 2, and might be more of a background thing that the characters hear about.
Yeah.
And may not intrude except occasionally, and that's okay. They don't have to be weighted equally. It's just a way for the characters to know that there's depth to the world, that there's more going on that they can handle, but that they're never going to run out of things to do.
Yeah.
And if they get tired of one plot line, they can skip over to the other. And so that's sort of a rule of 3 rule that I kind of impose on my own campaigns.
It's more of a guideline than a rule.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right, great. How can people get in touch with you to find out more about this rule of 3 and/or just being awesomer?
I don't know about that. But if you have questions about rule of 3, then maybe I can help you, or D&D questions. But if you want to be more awesome, talk to somebody more awesome. You can reach me on Twitter at ChrisPerkinsDND.
Excellent. And thank you. And we'll be back with some more segments next week.